Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first Bodhana Group webinar series. We are going to be starting our family webinar series tonight, which is a series of presentations that are going to be focused on board gaming in the home. And this will be therapeutic board gaming. This will be board games with the intent to teach or develop certain skills. So we're going to go ahead and share our PowerPoint that we're going to be using. And again, feel free to ask any questions that you might have during the webinar. We are definitely open for conversation. And as an added little bonus throughout this entire series, which will be running bi-weekly, we are also going to add in extra time at the end after we're done with the presentation. So if you have general questions about intentional gaming or therapeutic or beneficial gaming, please feel free to ask any kind of question that's off the top of your head. And we're hopefully over the series that's going to run over the next year. And until then, we're going to provide a lot of great content for bringing games into the home, or if you're also an educator or a facilitator or a therapist or a practitioner, you can use a lot of these helpful hints and advice as well. So we'll go ahead and get started with the share, and then we'll introduce ourselves and what we're going to be talking about today. All right, so as we had said, this is a family webinar series, or as James said it, fresh from the tree. We're going to be talking today about teaching board games. Our focus on information is from K through 5. Every month, we're going to be doing focus not only on K through 5 grades, but also 6 through 12 on the same topic every month. Not that there won't be some kind of crossover. So
there's probably likely to be quite a bit of crossover, but then like different nuances depending on grade range that you're talking about.
Absolutely. So I am Jack Berkenstock Jr. I am the executive director and one of the founders of the Bodhana Group, which we'll talk about in a second. One of my nerdy claims to fame is that I've seen Ghostbusters over 375 times. I'm also a master's level clinician that's been in the human services field for about 24 years. Sir.
I like that you don't lead with the master's level clinician. Like, my name's Jack. I'm the executive director. I love Ghostbusters. Also,
yeah. Also, I have that. Yeah. Well, I don't want to be haughty, you know.
So I'm James Kirk. As that is my real name. I am one of the therapeutic GMs with the Bodhana Group. I just through working with Jack and them, like I've kind of been trained on the method. Gloomhaven is life, which is it's a declamatory statement. That's not a question. Gloomhaven is a board game. At some point, we might talk about it in our webinar titled "Board Games That Weigh More Than You Think They Do."
That is definitely true.
First one that we talk about. But that's us.
Yes.
Boy, howdy.
So at Bodhana, we use all manner of tabletop role-playing games and board games for therapeutic uses, skill building, and education. That is anything from board game programs like here we have a pre-COVID photo from 6 Feet Under Games in New Holland, where we run a monthly group meetup, basically helping to use board games to meet new friends and work on skills like resilience and social skills, things of that nature. We also offer consultation and training for agencies or practitioners willing to bring this into their own practice. We annually run the Save Against Fear convention, and we have our own book. So far, it's a volume on therapeutic role-playing games, but we are very shortly going to be releasing our second volume that exclusively focuses on tabletop board games. So we do a lot of great things, and we'll have contact info at the end of the webinar for you to be able to reach out to us.
So today we're going to talk about board games. Specifically today with board games, we are going to talk about teaching board games, like how to show people how to play games, which, believe it or not, there's actually a system to it that can be employed that kind of maximizes both like retention and understanding when you're teaching somebody a board game. We're going to talk about choosing a game. We're going to talk about learning before people, That is not like what happened before people were on the planet, but like before you have people in front of you playing a game with you, the stuff that you, as the person that's going to be teaching the game, should do or should know. We're going to have a section called At the Table, which is where we discuss actually teaching the games to other people. And then after the game, because there are some things that should be done after you're done playing the game as well. We're also going to talk a little bit about make it yourself games. This is taking a board game like, say, the super fun Monopoly, and just, maybe your kids are younger and they wouldn't really be into Monopoly, but they see the Monopoly board and they have questions. Let them make up a game. That's fun. And then Jack and I are going to go over some examples of appropriate games for this specific age range, along with some like companies, the designers that make them, so that you, as the attendees, can take that information and more easily find these games and these designers.
All right. So, as James kind of said, and he and I are going to kind of bop back and forth as we go through this. There's a lot of considerations when you talk at the basic level of just choosing your game, because there is no shortage of games in the board game hobby. I think they estimate about 1,500 games come out every year, whether it's smaller independent press or all the way to your larger like Parker Brothers, Milton Bradley. So there's a whole lot of things you want to look at when you're choosing a game. So length of play is probably one of the first ones, because not everyone is going to be able to sit down for a 4 to 6 hour rousing session of Risk. So you want to look at the side of the box to figure what is the play time. Specifically with younger children, we mention that because sometimes kids have kind of an attention shelf life. So sitting down to play a game that lasts more than an hour to 2 hours, that could be very difficult. So when you're looking at games, you want to look at, okay, this game, 15 to 20 minutes. Now we do also kind of include the noob rule. And what's the noob rule, James?
So this is when you are first playing the game, or you have people that have never played the game before. And when you're teaching a game, that's every time, right? So unless everybody has played the game before, you're going to have new players. If a game box on the box itself says this game takes approximately 30 to 45 minutes to play, you should probably add like at least 30 minutes, depending on the number of people that are new in the game. Don't grab a game and say like, oh, at max 45 minutes, I've got 35 minutes. This will be plenty of time to play the game. We'll just have to hurry up a little bit. No, because there's a lot of learning curve to things like this, and you have to make time for that so that you're not rushing new players or making them feel like they're rushed, and then they end up not getting as much out of the experience.
Yeah, or I mean, some games even say if it's a game that takes about 45 minutes to an hour, add maybe 15 minutes per new player at the table, because you also got to figure people are learning their turns, and we're going to talk about things that constitute different board games that are all considerations for teaching. That person, as they're learning the game, is going to take subsequently less time over time, but initially they're going to be kind of paralysis analysis, which we'll talk about, which is I have all of these options. What do I do on my turn? So just bear in mind as you're going, especially for kind of that first time, but also over time, if you're going to be introducing new players to that game because of how much fun you had with it, bear in mind that length of play is going to differ. Level of rule complexity. There are a wide array of board games out there. Like we said, some have a one-sheet rule book. Some have a 115-page rule book. Not an exaggeration.
I do want to say that for the purposes of K-5, if you have picked a game that has like more than like 5 pages of actual rules, I probably wouldn't use that game.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not.
There are games that have very large rule books. Yeah. So engaging in the level of complexity of play. Also the engagement of the game. Some people are very visual when they play games. They're like, even if they don't really necessarily get into the gameplay itself, they really like the color and the presentation. Sometimes they just like playing with the pieces that come in the game because they're engaging. Different things will bring in different types of players. So actual visual representation of the game might be a consideration for you. The variety of skills that you need to be able to play the game. Um, we're talking about this from a skill building standpoint. So you kind of already have an idea of what skills you're looking to build on. So you want to look for games that have rules or have at least game descriptions that will benefit that type of play. If you're working on reading comprehension, or retention of information, playing games that have a strong memory concept are very good. Just as an example.
Yeah.
And
Or
then
go ahead. I was just say with learners that are, particular from that K through 5 age, if you're looking for things like pattern recognition games or color match games or number games, you're going to want to look for what elements are included in that game. And a lot of times they're going to give you basic explanations on the box. Some companies, one in particular, we're going to be talking about at the end of the webinar, called Hubba Games. They actually will print the skill that the game develops for the child on the box itself. So a lot of companies are getting very savvy to this idea that, games are fun. It's a great family game night, but games also have this humongous potential to build a lot of very good foundational skills. We mentioned two of them at the top, but social skills, resilience, critical thinking, creative thinking, expression, a lot of great skills. So also think about what skills are needed maybe to play the game, because sometimes you might want someone to play a game that maybe might be above the complexity level. And that's where we're going to have James kind of take the last point because he loves talking about this one.
well, yeah, so be honest about skill level. Okay, I'm a parent. I have a daughter. She's 6. Um, I will tell you that she is the smartest kid on the planet. Virtually every parent, for good reason, says, like, my kid is really super smart, and they may be. But when you're selecting a board game, one thing you want to remember, especially if you're trying to get them into playing board games, is that kids at this grade level carry a lot of frustration with tasks that they don't like just immediately pick up, right? Or engage with. So be honest about the skill level of the players that you're going to be. If you think that something might be out of their range, I'm not saying like don't push them, but don't play chess when they want to play checkers, right? Like pick a game that sort of emulates their skill level and gives them a bump, gives them a push. You don't want to make something impossible for them. You do want to make it challenging, and that can very much sometimes be a blurry line to walk.
Absolutely. And again, just as a reminder, feel free if anyone has any questions throughout, please feel free to, unmute and go ahead or you can type them in the chat if you would like.
What's in the box?
Pain is in the box. If you're a fan of the Dune series, you just had to throw that in there. I love it.
Sure.
There's a lot in the box. There can be a lot. And it's important as we cover a lot of these elements to know that these can add or detract from not only the fun element, but also, if you yourself are not an avid or experienced board gamer, there can be a fair amount of intimidation when you're opening up a board game for the first time, especially games with a lot of different pieces, a lot of different components. Sometimes you will look at this, thing that looks like someone just dumped a yard sale box into your box. So here's a little bit of kind of a geography of what's going on here. So you typically, with most board games, you're going to have a board or a play mat of some kind. That's where your pieces, your cards, your dice, most of the action will take place, hence the title board game.
There's also like the tokens, meeples, or pawns. These are usually pieces in the box that will represent the player's position on the board. tokens or pawns, things like, that were in like Sorry, Parcheesi, or um, even Life, was a car token with little stick people that you put in, little mastermind things. Um, Meeples are little like generically shaped pieces that have their arms and their legs sticking out, and a little like rounded head, and they're all like one single piece. We call them meeples because they are made to look like peoples, um, thus meeples. At least that's what I think. I don't know what the actual.
It actually stands for My Peoples. So
Okay,
those are my people on the board. Yep.
see, I learned something tonight.
It's
Um, so yeah, meeples or tokens or pawns, something to represent you on the board. And then most games need some kind of resolution mechanic. If you do something in the game needs to give you some kind of information on if or not you succeeded in doing that thing. This is most often done through either dice or some sort of card. There's either a deck of cards, there might be a couple of different decks of cards depending on game complexity. And then to be able to understand all of this, there is a rule book, which really is sometimes just a sheet, right? Like single paper. Hi, here's all the stuff you need to know. And then you have fiddly bits. And fiddly bits are what they sound like. It's what we refer to as all the little pieces and tokens and stuffs that are inside the box that are not the pawns.
yeah.
It might just be money. It might be, money and extra cards and other pieces to put on a tracker of some type. Um, Player aids or online references. A lot of games, again, are becoming savvy with this stuff. So they are putting inside of the actual box or on it some type of QR code or some type of thing to scan that says, if you would like to watch the video of how to play this game, scan this and go here. There's YouTube videos out there for those types of things as well. Um,
Some games actually go one better, and they'll actually include player aids that are like actual cards that will tell you what you can do in your turn and what certain symbols in the games mean. And when we go into like teaching and providing for a lot of this other thing, this is going to tell you a lot more about the game, and it could be a very easy way to not have to have questions coming up consistently where everybody needs to go back and reflect on that rule book. So again, like James said, gamer companies are getting very savvy because that's a very indispensable aid. I would have to say that Disney, the Disney game Villainous, has actually gone above and beyond, where each player has a guide to how they themselves should win, as well as information about how the other players around the table can win or lose. So it's an incredible player aid. I guess we can finish up setup guide. Most games, to help you with the first time that you're going to be trying something outside of the box, will include a sample setup. So it might be, here are the cards to use, or here's the setting for difficulty to use when you're just learning the game. That's also another thing that's been quite popular in recent board game development. So a very, very helpful tutorial that kind of comes with the game that you've bought.
but before people get to your table, right? Unbox your game. There should be some sort of a lot of rule books have a right in the beginning. It has like an inventory sheet. Like it'll tell you 32 player cards, 15 monster cards, 4 six-sided dice, and it goes through like all the stuff that's in the game. Make sure all that stuff is in the box, because it'll be awkward if you're trying to teach a game and you're like, okay, and then you guys go to your player pawns, and you'll see those. Consult the manual, right? Just go ahead and read the actual rule book, or look through the rules, and get familiar with them. Even if you just get familiar with where to find information during the course of the game. Other resources as necessary. Again, we had referenced in the last slide talking about player aids and online videos. I want to bring up something here that you should be very careful about videos for a game that say that they are a let's play. Not that they're not good videos, right? They're actually they're fun, but a let's play video is different from a how to play video. A how to play will show you how to play the game, somebody instructing you how to do it so that you don't have to read a rule book. A let's play video is you most often you watching other people play the game, which might be instructive, but those videos are not designed to be here's how you play the game type of videos. Right. So just be careful when you're selecting a video that you're not watching a let's play, because that can be something very different.
Now,
It's probably time at this point, while you're sort of going through and trying to sort of retain this information even yourself so you can teach other people, put cap A into slot B, set the game up, right? Go through the actual initial game setup. There are games that tell you if it's the first time you're playing this game, use this setup so that you can learn the basic mechanics and basic rules. Set the game up and run some simulations. Run through a couple of turns. Run through a couple of turns playing a couple of players at the same time, just so you can see how things interact on the board, and how the turns flow, how a game flows. You may not necessarily need to do this with Candyland, but there are games where it's necessary to do that. Jack, what did you
yeah, and another element of put cap A into slot B is there are a lot of games that are being designed that are like three-dimensional games, or there are a lot of games that might have like little dishes or trays, or other kind of things that highlight what's on the board. Everdell is one example of a very recent game that uses like a three-dimensional tree that is on the board, and so sometimes there might be some construction and setup that's involved in the game, involving kind of extra pieces. So sometimes when you're going ahead to do this, an important aspect of this is knowing where things go, knowing where to put things, knowing what components go, either where on the board or in the play space, which is another awesome part of the setup guide, is that it will show you, here's what a sample table setup looks like for this game. This is where your component should be. That's going to give you an idea of how to get the game set up in a very good amount of time, so you're not then spending extra game time just learning what the geography of the gameplay is. It can also kind of give you a benefit of how much space it's going to take at your table, because that's another consideration with games. Some games take a lot of real estate, so you always want to make sure that you know where things go. And again, that simulation James talked about works out very, very beneficially to that, because that simulation is then, how do we move these pieces? Should we maybe put these in better reach of people because maybe they got smaller arms, because we're talking about the little kiddos here. Do you want to finish on put game away, James?
Yeah. So, and then putting the game away, and this seems like such a no duh, like simple thing to say, but make sure when you put the game away, you know how everything goes back in the box, because sometimes, and if you own a copy of Fireball Island from Restoration Games, then not everything in that box goes back the same way that you took it out the first time. That box is a weird magic thing that just the pieces mystically go in differently after
there's a science to it.
The game out the first time. But while that's a very complicated example of it, just make sure you know where everything goes inside of the box and that you can put the game away, because you want to be able to instruct the kids how to put it away as well. So knowing where everything goes will help with that.
All right. Yeah, this is definitely where you shine, my brother. So
start with the goal. Okay. If you attended or you're watching this webinar and all it said was teaching board games K through 5, and we didn't tell you in the beginning what we were going to be talking about, you're going to have all kinds of questions while we've been talking. You have likely not listened to much of what we've said, right? So think about players that are sitting down to play a game. They're all like 8 years old, right? When I was 8 and I was playing a game, I want to know how to win. What's my win? How do I finish? How do I finish faster than the rest of these adults at the table, right? So you want to explain the goal, or the how do you win. You want to be able to explain it with a clear progression so that you can tell them, okay, guys, the goal of this game is to get to the other end of the board. You're going to do this by rolling your dice, doing what the dice tell you to turn by turn, and then playing a card every turn from your hand to affect, either you or one of the other players. That might be all you need to tell them. But they already have in their head, okay, so I win by getting to that space first before everybody else. I'm going to roll my dice. I'm going to do what the dice tell me. And then I'm going to play a card if I can that might affect one of the other players or help me. All right, got it. Right? Super simple. Okay. How do I get there? That's part of the clear progression. Right. And you can go through sort of like, how one goes about finishing their goal. It is also good to reinforce at the beginning of the game if this is cooperative or competitive. Back in my day, we didn't really have cooperative games. We were playing a board game. Everything was competitive. Nobody worked together in games, unless you were colluding with other players at the table to stop one person from winning. That was as far as cooperative got. Now, there's probably just as many cooperative as there are competitive, and maybe more cooperative games now.
That's
Definitely
fair.
way more than there used to be. And there are some games where all of the players have a single goal that they're going to come together to do. But in achieving that goal, one person is declared like the best at doing it, right? And I call those games co-opetitive because it gives you one solid goal to go after, but you're still like sort of competing with the people at the table to get there. So teach the goal first, because anything else that you tell them that's not how do I win in the beginning of teaching them, they will not listen to, because all they want to know is how they're going to win. Okay.
Well,
Once you
and
get
I was just saying another part of that, and James is probably going to go in, but just it bears kind of a focus. If I know the goal, I then have a framework for every other piece of that rule book that's going to come after it. Because now, much the way that the brain learns is that we take something we know and we attach new information to how relevant it is to what we already know. So as we're teaching, we're using the way that the brain learns to its best possible benefit. Oh, you just told me about these special cards. I know that I use cards to get ahead. So now can I tell the difference between that card and the other card? That's going to be important for me to know when I'm looking at how many of this color card my opponent has versus that color card that I have in my hand. So a lot of that set, literally, it's the best way to start the stage.
So again, most games will tell you how to approach the game as a player, and will give you like kind of some basic tactics or some things that you want to do during your turn, or at least some options. There are some games that are very basic, like don't break the ice. It was a very simple, like you did one thing and you just hope that the thing that you didn't break the game before somebody else broke it, right? So some games do have a couple of different options in a turn. And that's what we mean by turn anatomy. You want to know the things that I can do on my turn to get me toward my goal. There also might be important variables along the way. Now, it can be something as simple as, guys, somewhere in this deck of cards, there are two cards that when you get it, you immediately put it down on the table and you lose your next turn. That's an important variable I would like to know about before I start playing. Because if I decide like I want to draw 9 cards this turn, maybe I don't. If both of those lose a turn cards are in that deck. So you want to tell them important variables, things that they need to know that are out of their control that might complicate them getting to their goal. When I talk about complications, right? So there's two main types of direct complications. There's either player-driven complications, which are things that my opponents are going to do to me during the course of this game to prevent me from getting to the goal before everybody else does. Right? So those are player-driven complications. There's also game, or what we call RNG driven. RNG stands for random number generator. it's most often used in computer games, but I use it here to kind of simulate like dice rolling, using dice mechanics to come up with stuff. You don't know what the dice are going to roll unless you're me, and then you know they're going to be terrible. But you roll them because that's one of the things that's going to complicate it. Competitive games are usually player-driven complications. Cooperative games are most often game-driven complications. The game might run itself while the players are making decisions on how to beat it. But the game itself is what generates the complications and tries to stop the players from being successful instead of the players themselves getting in each other's way.
Yeah. And especially again, driving back to we're focusing on K through 5. Let's look at the fact that we really want players to know that if it is a game where the players drive complication to each other, I mean, sorry is a very, again, it's a classic example of, there's a lot of frustration around that table when, you land and people are like, oh man, you threw me back again. And, it's so many conversations where it was like, that's kind of the point of the game, which again, there were always secondary conversations about, well, why are you just picking on me? Well, the dice made it easier for me to land there. So get the most out of your move. If you can get that part of the conversation of the rules out of the way from the beginning, you know that that's going to happen. It doesn't always kind of take the sting out of it, but it certainly goes a heck of a long way to starting that process. So you can even have less conflict at the table.
I will tell a very quick anecdote. My father decided early on that it was probably not a good idea for me and my sister to be playing it. Like, we didn't do a lot of like family board game night stuff because my dad and I were into a lot of stuff that my mom and my sister were just not into. But we played Sorry, which is why I was giggling or smiling when Jack brought this game up.
It's a classic.
We taught my sister how to play Sorry, and she played and like got her tail kicked in. And during the game, she had all 4 of her pawns at one point all returned to home, right, without any of them getting through the game. And she said, for a game called Sorry, I don't hear anybody apologizing. And I picked up the box for the game where it just says sorry, like on the board, and I said, this already said it before we started. I assumed you understood what that meant. And then like just put it down. And my dad at that point was like, yeah, no, we should not do this.
Different games for this household.
They
games.
already fight over enough things. So I hope that none of the challenges in the games that you're playing turn out to be some kind of Sisyphean feat to try and get through, right? Don't play those games.
Nice Greek reference, by the way.
Thanks, buddy.
Sure.
So some challenges, and this first one is so for K through 5. If you have a younger, tiny human, attention keeping. See how long that took? I just lost the kids. Like in that span of time, right? Keeping their attention is going to be super hard. And that's why earlier I brought up one of the factors being visually pleasing games that are fun to look at, games that are like the pieces are fun to touch or play with, games that have a like a physical or a kinetic component to them. Like those are the types of things that you can sort of use to keep their attention on a game. Yep. You also want to pay attention to the type of learner that the players are at the table. And some of them, you may not know this. It might be like your son or your daughter, maybe, your 2 kids, but they may have a friend coming over. You don't know how this friend learns. So you just want to be prepared for people that are readers. Do they work best off of just, maybe reading the rule book themselves for a little bit, or giving them a sort of a made up game description? Are they visual based? Do they do they work better looking at, some games include like diagrams or examples of play inside the book. Can you just say, like, well, so line of sight means that you need to be able to see the other pawn. So this, and show them a picture of it. Like, this is the examples of that type of thing. Um, what we call the doer. Uh, this is the kid at the table that's just like, we just play. I just want to play. I don't pay attention to any of this stuff. Like, I just want to play the game. I'll learn it when we play it. But they do.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they're just not, they don't retain information by having it fed to them or reading them. Maybe they need to physically engage with it or just do the thing, um, to be able to learn best. Um,
Yeah. Most definitely. And no, I mean, anytime you're trying to teach anything, knowing the learner best, not only enhances the learning curve, but it also is a way to further engage that person in their style of learning, which makes them more immersed in the process. It makes them more eager to do more. So speaking about eagerness to do more, the yielding to frustration. I know that a very important goal, and again, this is one of those things that's slowly going the way of the dodo, like you're not getting up from the table until you eat every single scrap of food from your plate, where we are learning that sometimes that really doesn't teach the skill we want to teach. But sometimes you can get so far in a game where you know that the game is not to be won. And at some point, you call that kind of like a mercy call. Instead of instilling frustration, if the game is pretty much to the point where the point variance is off, or it could be a challenge that sometimes kids are going to want to quit early in a game. Now, that frustration could be based on it's not the right game for them. It could be frustration just because they're not winning. And use your best judgment, but also bear in mind that if you know that you're going to be losing the game and there's still a lot of game to be played, you yield to frustration, because a lot of times people like will use terms like flip out or burn out or meltdown, things like that. But any form of behavior is a form of communication. So if a person's communicating frustration at the table through behavior, you're going to see behaviors arise. So just try to realize where that might be coming from. If you're starting to see challenges at the table, people not paying attention, people getting up and walking away, people not really caring about what their turn is, these are all things that naturally can occur during the playing of a board game, especially if the dice, like James kind of said earlier, if they're not with you. Playing at risk only is so much fun for so long, hanging in there with that one little country of 3 people when your opponent owns the rest of the board.
I know, like myself as a parent, one of my defaults that I have to fight against, when my 6-year-old reacts negatively to something, I started very early on as a parent. I just wanted to take it personally. Like, I really thought that it was like, well, this kid doesn't like me, or I don't want to make decisions that hurt their feelings, or things like that. But I really, like, she's autistic. She's a 6-year-old autistic girl. There are some things that she has not gotten concepts of, like frustration. She can express it. I can understand what it is, but I have to stop myself from saying it's her against me, and sort of like stepping back and saying, okay, why is she like this? Like, what is frustrating her about this task? And seeing if I can help develop that sort of that coping mechanism, that ability to take that frustration. And if it's a task that she needs to learn or something she needs to develop, finding ways to develop that task and trying to minimize the frustration that comes out of it, instead of just kind of taking it personally when she gets frustrated and being like, well, then she doesn't like it.
Yeah. And sometimes forcing a person to complete a task that they're just not either ready to or able to do, it's more important to have the conversation about why than it is to force the person through that experience. So it's just, again, something, grain of salt.
Yep.
So here are some strategies, some helps, some things that we've kind of learned over time. We've referenced a couple of these in the past, but again, they're great reminders. Player aids or turn sheets. having a point of reference that every player can have a piece of, or having it in an area of the table that is reachable and accessible to everybody, helps to cut down on questions, which it not only it helps the player know where they're going, but bear in mind that this also provides a way to keep the flow of the game going, because every time that you have to consult a rulebook, you stop the game. And by stopping the game at each of those moments, you run the risk now of the game taking an additional 5 minutes for the whole table, which again, sometimes it's necessary. But having some of these helpful aids and turn sheets is a good way to help minimize that confusion around the table. So now instead of asking everybody, I can look at it and go, oh, yeah, okay, that's right, I got that. Plus, it also develops agency and autonomy, people finding the information on their own.
And I do want to say, like, not every game is going to require a turn sheet, like,
Right.
or a player aid. I mean, there are a lot of games for K through 5 are very simple as far as their turn anatomy. There's only one or two things you can do. I would say that if you have three or more things that have to take place during a turn, it might be handy to have them
Yeah.
written down, that that players can reference that.
Yeah. And some games, even especially games for younger children, may actually even print the turn order information on the game itself, like on the board. I know that Castle Panic, a very great cooperative game, actually prints like what to do at certain levels, or certain turns and rounds of the game. It'll tell you on the board when to do that. So again, looking back at that board or that mat, very helpful. Um, Pens, pencils, and paper. I mean, I think that that's kind of an automatic with most activities, especially if you need to keep score, or, little tickers as far as to where we're at in the turn order. um, yeah, this next one is a huge one. Dividers or sorters for larger games. Remember earlier when we talked about the whole nature of fiddly bits? You can open up games, and not only do you have like playing pieces for the players and where they move or when they move, now you have games that have counters for health and counters for defense and counters for magic points and counters for, specialty items. Games distinguish themselves in a lot of ways. Having dividers or sorters cuts down on time, because not only do you know where to get the pieces that you need, as opposed to digging in la pile that sits inside the board game box, it also gives you a very convenient place of where to put the pieces. And there are specialty shops and stores and websites you can go to, like Broken Token, and things like that, that will actually custom make dividers that are built for certain board games to help even keep your pieces in your box organized. So a very good accessibility option, which actually helps improve the flow of the game.
I like to give people jobs when I'm teaching a game to younger kids. Um, so I might just hand a deck of cards to somebody, be like, "Hey, do you know how to shuffle cards?" And they may be like, "No." And then I'll ask, like, "Does anybody know how to shuffle cards here?" And one person will be super proud of the fact that they can shuffle cards. And then they'll tell me how they've learned to shuffle cards and how often they get to practice it and why they get to practice it. And now I've got a story. So I'll give them the cards and I'll say, "Okay, you're my shuffler. Like, for this game, when this deck of cards needs to be shuffled, I need you to do it. But you got to stay on top of it, because this deck of cards we have to make sure that it's completely, that it's full once it starts to get real low. Hey, I've got money in the game. Who would like to be the banker?" You probably get more volunteers for that, because everybody likes to be the person that is in control of the funds,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So you get one person to be the banker. You see where I'm going with this? Like, you're giving everybody, outside of their turn, you're giving them a reason to focus on the game. You're giving them a reason to be engaged, and you're giving them something to do that is their job. How many times have you told, like, your 8 or 9 year old, like, "Okay, buddy, I got one job for you. Okay, I need you to take this bag and take it downstairs to your mother. Look, look at me. Take this downstairs to mom. Okay, can you do that? That's your one job, right?" And how many times have they not done it? I get it, like most of the time. But if you give them a job while you're playing a game and while you're having a good time, you're giving them something else to focus on, which will, again, raise that agency. It'll raise their immersion in the game, it will keep them focused on something. Because when they're having fun, they don't want to be the person that slacked on their job.
Yeah, it also develops responsibility and ownership. It's a good skill piece that often is secondary to the game, but it helps enhance the game. Because again, if everyone has a job and they do that job, the flow of the game works quicker. Plus, we're also talking building collaboration into the mix because, if everybody has a job and all of those little gears are part of the big machine, there you go.
Snacks and drinks. Stay hydrated. It's important.
Absolutely.
Also,
But
just to have some munchies at the table, because if you want to have other reasons to keep kids at the table, goldfish, great reason to keep kids at the table. I will stay at your table.
but also have rules about policing the use of food, because some components can be delicate if cards aren't like, don't have a sheen to them or emboss, if they're not in covers. Sometimes cards can get a little sticky, components can get messy. Also, where you keep the snacks and drinks. Maybe you don't want them at the main table where the board and all of the cards that could get wet and ruined would be, because again, kids sometimes get excited and they can get a little messy. But it is a question, especially if you're playing for a long amount of time, that you might want to answer and consider for your table.
Get started as soon as possible. This is why we talk about learning before people. The more familiar you are with how a game works, the more succinct you're going to be with the rules, and the quicker you're going to just be able to get the game started, because that's ultimately what they're sitting down. This next one is probably my most important piece of advice for the game, and I think it's probably because it's something that my dad did for me, and I remember this being a thing. My rule is don't play for them, play with them. Okay? When they're presented with a choice in the game, even like my default for older players is to tell them, okay, dude, you can do like one of these four things. I'm going to tell you right now, based on where you are, this is the thing you want to do. Okay, that's me playing for them. I just told them what the best decision is. Now, they could still just very easily be like, well, that guy that's played the game 40 times doesn't know what he's talking about. This is my first time. I'm going to do my thing, right? Most often they don't, right? So with younger kids, it's not just telling them, like, this is what I think you should do, because we all know as parents, when you tell them to do something, they do the opposite. But when you're explaining things in the game, even your tone of voice. Okay, so you can go left or you can go right. Which way do you want to go? Right now, based on that tone, I'm going to go right, because right sounded like the sunny path. Yeah. Going left sounded like the sad path, right? So when you're talking to them at the table, just try to be mindful of it and just tell them things like, all right, so left will give you this, right will give you this. Which one would you like to have? Let them choose, even if it's the wrong thing, even if it's the decision that makes them lose the game. We're going to get into like how to talk about that after it's over, but during the play of the game, don't play for them. I hosted escape rooms for a very, very long time. And one thing that we ended up doing was sometimes giving people an answer for a puzzle in the room. I can tell you that most of my rooms, once I did that, people stopped trying because they knew that was an option. They knew, like, if I gave them a couple of hints and they didn't do it, that I was just going to give them the answer for it anyway. And then they just stopped doing the puzzles because they were sitting and they were waiting for me to give them the answers just to get them through the room.
Yeah. And again, a huge part of the way that our brains learn is our brains learn through experience. We learn through trial and error because that direct experience that we have leaves an indelible mark on the way that our brain processes, accesses, stores, and retrieves information. So if I'm telling you what the strategy is, it's just info I'm giving you. But if I now make the decision, I lost on that turn, I go, oh man, I'm now having like an emotional, visceral, direct response reaction to what happened. So it's going to make my learning that much more imperative and important. Um, and then kind of finally, let them set the pace or the length. And that's kind of one of those things that you can do like, okay, maybe you're only going to play the game for like 2 hours. Maybe it's a longer game, but you're going to say, we're only going to play for this much amount of time and make that kind of a part of your regular routine. This way, people know what to expect. They know that there's kind of a time clock there because sometimes you may want to play a game that extends for a long amount of time. There are some games, one of my personal favorites are the Choose Your Own Adventure set of games from Z-Man. And these literally have turned the old Choose Your Own Adventure books into games with dice and challenges and 90% of the game is reading, which parents and teachers love. But letting folks know each chapter takes roughly about an hour, hour and a half. Don't say we're going to play through this whole book and then, an hour and a half later, people are starting to fall asleep and they're falling off of their chairs, and you didn't set the pace or the length. So how much time do we have? Also, breaks are important. Even though it's recreation, remember, we're using the brain. Typical research has shown us that the brain takes information comfortably up to about 45 minutes to an hour. Then we need a break because our brain has just taken too much. That's why average class times incorporate like a 10-minute turn down or whatever. So bear all of this in mind when you're teaching, especially a new game, because now you're totally front loading a person with information. Bear that in mind with their overall play experience. Anything else on that point, James?
I'm good.
So, as we said, some suggested game lists of companies. Hubba Games. It is a German-based company that is exclusively a company that makes a lot of games for children. And first thing that you'll notice is the picture of this happy young man whose hairstyle looks like he stepped out in 1977. All the boxes are yellow. So if you're going to a game store and they handle Hubba Games, you're going to be able to spot those games very easily. Specifically, if you're looking for educational content, developmental content for a younger child, Hubba is definitely one of the go-to companies for this type of material. Here's a couple of different examples. King of Dice, which is a dice roller collector. So it's very similar to like a Yahtzee or a Sushi Dice, games of that nature. You also have Rhino Hero, which is a very fun game that even adults love, where you have a lot of stacking and dexterity. So now we're working on fine and gross motor skills. We're working on, just stacking, which is learning physics and chain of consequence. There's so many skills
It's also
out there.
visually just a very fun game to watch being played because you're basically like stacking rooms onto a building. And the idea of Rhino Hero is that you have a superhero that's looking for bad guys in this building as he's going up, but he's also a rhino. So he's very big and very heavy. So the idea is how high up can you get your rhino superhero before the whole, before the building collapses? So it's this very like cute idea that's turned into like just this wonderful game to play that incorporates something Jack and I have found is very lacking in a lot of board games, surprisingly, are games that have a dexterity or some type of like gross motor or fine motor development in it.
Yeah.
We used to have a bunch of them when we were kids. Perfection, Operation,
Yeah.
That other game that I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but like we had games that had built-in like fine motor or gross motor mechanics, and there's less and less of that out there now. And like Hubba is one of the companies when we were doing this, we talked about that. We were like, oh man, there's a lot of really cool stuff that comes out of this company.
Oh, absolutely. But we're not done yet. There's a couple of other great companies.
Game Right.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Game Right is another excellent company that makes a lot of family-based games. They also have some of their more popular titles here. They have Dragonwood, which is a fantasy setting that is a dice and card-based game that is very quick to learn, very engaging. They have Quicks, which is a math-based dice roller. They also have Rat-a-tat Cat, which is memory-based card collecting games. They're very quick, easy to pick up games. They're a very popular company. But one of our others, and again, not that one is least or most favorite, but I can talk forever about the Blue Orange.
Jack and I pretty regularly play blue orange games like now just because they're fun. Like it's not even like I don't even feel like these are great for younger kids, but they are really fun.
Yeah,
Battle Sheep, we have had some knockdowns
yeah,
on Battle Sheep.
Battle Sheep is a game where you use a little four-piece hex grids and you build a green pasture, and then you have discs that are like pretty nice heavy-weighted chips or even good components, and it's a stack of sheep. And basically, what you do is it starts off on one square, and you have the option of moving your stack, but you can move as many of them as you want. But you have to move them in a straight line until they're blocked either by the edge of the board or another piece. And the whole goal is you want to spread your sheep out to cover as much of the pasture as possible while all the other players are doing this too. So it's kind of like a push your luck, block your opponent. It's a very chain of effect, kind of forward thinking. It's a very logical kind of a game, but it's in this nice little fun pastiche, and the game takes like 15 minutes to play. So it's a beautiful game. Aztec is one of my personal favorites. It uses domino tiles with colors and different Aztec inspired symbols. It's a color symbol match game, but it's also builder, because when you lay the dominoes over each other, the domino has to cross over two previous dominoes. So you can't just stack them on top of one another. You're building what we would call a depleting resource. Your
Yeah, because you
real
do run out
estate
of real estate.
shrinks. Oh yeah, very quickly. And Planet. Did you ever play Planet, James?
I did. We played Planet together for
Yes.
I think it was your second time. It was my first time playing it.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about Planet?
Yeah, so Planet was a very, very unique game. I hadn't played really anything like this before.
Not at all.
When I say it's a tableau builder, what I mean is you are attempting to build like an overall like picture or some type of landscape or thing, right? So in this, you are making your own planet. You get a polyhedral 12-sided thing, right? Looks like a 12-sided die, but all of them are blank. And in the game, there are land pieces that have a couple of different land types. Some of them only have one land type, but they're all designed to look like if you were in orbit and looking down, like this is what you would see on that planet. And each of these pieces magnetically fits into one of the 12 spots on your planet.
Yeah.
As you go through the game, you're given habitat goals of like, collect the most watery things, and then you get the penguin card, which is worth X number of points. And those goals change throughout the course of the game.
Yeah.
So for like the first 3 tiles, you might be going for water stuff, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna get all the water. But then for the rest of the game, there's no water goals. There's very few water goals.
Yeah.
Right. So now it might be more forest for the next turn, and maybe more desert for the next turn. So you do want to kind of diversify, but you fit these pieces into your polyhedral planet thing, and you try to make land masses that kind of share the same type. And the number of pieces that you have that are touching each other that have that landmass is the total number of pieces that share that one mass of land, which is how you score points. It's super unique, and you're just creating planets, the ground of planets, from this 12-sided thing. It's really cool.
Well, and at the same time, because different animals are attracted to different styles of habitat, whether it's like tundra or forest or Arctic or wood or whatever, you're also teaching kids about ecology, and you're teaching
Yes,
kids about the planet and the animal kingdom. So it's again, educational, informative, ton of fun, which again, if you've never really engaged the modern board game hobby, we've done a lot since Parcheesi. We've done a lot since Clue, which
yes,
are
for
great,
sure.
still some good classic games and such, but there's a lot to be said about the new stuff. So just an info slide. If you want to get more information for us, we're going to kind of open up the forum to see if there are any other kind of questions or anything that might come out to us. It is our first webinar, of course. So over time, we are just going to have more topics, more stuff to talk about. But we are at www.thebodhanagroup.org. Email us at thebodhanagroup@gmail.com. You can check us out on Facebook or Twitter. Please feel free to order our Wizards, Warriors, and Wellness. We are going to have the Blue Book coming out very soon, which is focusing on therapeutic applications of tabletop board games. And every year in October, we run our annual Save Against Fear convention, which is our main fundraiser, as well as a platform for us to get out there and talk about this use of gaming that we love so much. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share and we all come back here. So are there any other questions that are out there? Do you have anything for us, Missy? I will take that as a no.
All right.
Yeah. So please stay tuned to upcoming webinars. You can visit our website again to find out more information about how to book. Our next series that we have next week is actually going to be a special deep dive, what we call Behind the Screen, with our special guest, Eddie Webb, who is the developer and the designer of a game called Pugmire, which is a role-playing game. And that is going to be a professionals-focused webinar that is talking specifically about the therapeutic uses of that role-playing game as a way to deliver therapy and to do groups. So please stay tuned into that, as well as upcoming series talking about everything from board games for resilience to board games for critical thinking to board games that are for education and dexterity. So thank you, everyone. I have been, and will probably continue to be, Jack Berkenstock, one of your hosts.
I am going to try to remain James Kirk. And we will see you. Jack and I will be back on doing the next webinar in 2 weeks from now, which is the grade 6 through 12 presentation of teaching board games.
Yep.
Next week you'll see Max Yoder along with the creator of Pugmire to talk about that.
All right. So stay tuned. And if you like what you heard, please join us in the future and tell some folks about the great time that you had. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully at a table real soon. So while we are mid-COVID, take care of yourselves and each other. Okay. All right. Thank you all and be well.